Hi, good morning, Bio 202 students. Welcome to Focus Session 5, all about the blood. For next couple weeks, we're going to kind of power through these next two sessions, or units, I should say. They're not overly difficult, which is why you only have, this week to get ready for hematology and next week for immunology. But if you missed Dr. Curley's class yesterday, you can choose to take both of these exams next week. Um, But if you want to take the hematology exam early, uh, I by the end of this week, just let Dr. Curley know. Otherwise, she'll default you to taking both exams next week. So we're going to cover a little bit about the blood. Um, we kind of already started this with some of the blood typing work that we did in lab. That is covered under this, so I'm not going to cover that here since we already kind of did it in lab. So I'll cover some of the other basics for hematology here in this one. So again, we'll talk about what is blood, we'll talk about homeostasis and hemostasis, life of a red blood cell, and what I don't have here is I also added some platelet information, and we'll kind of go over the process of how blood clots work or hemostasis. So blood is made up of three different things. They're made up of, well, two bigger things we call formed elements and plasma. So formed elements are the cells, specifically the red blood cells or erythrocytes, the white blood cells, the leukocytes, or the platelets or thrombocytes. Um, Usually when you have to donate like blood, it's usually the formed elements that you are donating. And then the plasma is basically made up of a combination of water, proteins like albumin, ions, and then other nutrients and waste. You can also donate plasma as well, but all of these things together are what form what we call blood. So when we talk about having blood and blood formation, we call that erythrocyte homeostasis. So just think about yourself right now, kind of where you're at. We're all at different, um, I'll call them fitness levels. And all I really mean by fitness is we all burn a certain amount of energy, and we all need a certain amount of oxygen to get our day-to-day tasks done. For some of us, that might also involve, going to the gym, going on hikes every day, working something that's labor intensive, like in a factory. For others, it could be, you sit on the computer all day, you really don't move a lot, um, or you kind of go to do your day-to-day like grocery tasks, whatever. Um, all the things that you normally do in a given day, every single day, your body has this baseline or this homeostasis of I need this amount of blood to get all of these tasks that my person is trying to do. But if you ever, decided, or if you've ever been in a workout class, or if you decided like one day, like I'm gonna go hike or something, when you do that for the first time, your body gets a little tired. You might feel sore. You might be breathing heavy. Your heart rate will be elevated. And the reason for that is that your body's not ready or conditioned to do more than what you normally do on a day-to-day basis. So because of that, you have low oxygen or hypoxemia in your cells. They do not have enough oxygen for you to be doing your crazy hikes or walks or runs, whatever. So this triggers a process of of developing new red blood cells. Things that could cause you to develop new red blood cells, like I mentioned, more exercise. That's usually the biggest one. High elevations. So um, at a certain elevation, I'll say like here in Phoenix, the blood cells can hold on to a set amount of oxygen. Um, But if you go to a higher elevation, it's a lot harder for your blood cells to keep the same amount of oxygen. So say if I'm a red blood cell that's holding, I don't know, 90% oxygen, at a higher elevation, it could be close to like 80 or 70. And so now your blood cell, the red blood cells that you do have, cannot carry enough oxygen for you to do the day-to-day tasks. So it triggers your body to make more red blood cells to make up for the fact that your red blood cells cannot carry as much oxygen as they would like to. And then the other one is blood loss or hemorrhaging. So if you bleed out, obviously you're going to need more red blood cells to replace those. Homeostasis is a negative feedback loop. So again, if I start working out a lot, like every single day, I'm going to need more red blood cells to keep up with the amount of oxygen my cells are requiring. So I'm going to create more red blood cells to meet that demand. However, if I do that and then I decide to stop and I stop for a few months and I just kind of sit at home on the couch playing my Switch, whatever. Now my body is overproducing red blood cells, which as a living thing, it's a waste of our energy to maintain those red blood cells. So basically the body's going to tell it, hey, you can get rid of some of these red blood cells. We don't need to replace them. And over time, your red blood cell count will decrease to match whatever level of fitness that you have. The kidney is what triggers the release of a of an enzyme, or we'll call it a hormone called erythropoietin, and that will stimulate the red blood cell production in the bone marrow. And then hemostasis, this kind of goes back to like blood loss and hemorrhaging, is the process of basically stopping your blood cells from leaking out or coming out when you have like a tear. It's done in 3 steps: the vascular spasm, platelet plug, and then coagulation. But I'll cover that more in a separate slide here. Okay, so what I have here in front of you is when I was Dr. Curley's student, we had to know what I called the life of the red blood cell. So I talked about the things that cause us to create more red blood cells. Um, what we don't have to talk about, what we won't cover in Dr. Curley's class, is the destruction and recycling of the red blood cells. So what you have in front of me is the whole life of red blood cell from basically birth to death. Um, for our purposes, we really only care about producing the red blood cells and getting it out to the body. You don't have to worry about any of the destruction portion with the bilirubin and excuse me, the the macrophages, liver, etc. So I wouldn't worry about that. Um, the way I have it broken up is everything in the green up here is done inside the bone marrow. And then obviously the orange and the red, that's kind of more of the red blood cell being in your arteries or your veins. So again, so the way this process starts is you're going to have a low oxygen or hypoxemic condition. Let's just say you decided to start working out a lot. That's going to trigger that low oxygen condition will trigger the kidney to release EPO or erythropoietin, and then that will go to your bone marrow to start the process of erythropoiesis, which is the development of red blood cells. So when the red blood cells start forming, um, we have a thing called hematopoietic stem cells, and so these are um, the immature blood cells that can turn into whatever blood cell you require. So these hematopoietic stem cells, um, they can turn into a red blood cell, they can turn into a white blood cell, or they could turn into a platelet, depending on what's needed. But for the purposes of this, that hematopoietic stem cell will turn into what we call a prourethroblast. So you kind of see it back here. So the way the cells develop, they're still eukaryotic cells, and so they're going to develop as our other cells. So they're going to have a nucleus. They're going to have the ribosomes. They're going to have smooth and rough ER. They're going to have the cytoplasm. They're going to have all the things that you generally consider are part of a cell. Um, but the purpose of a red blood cell is to carry oxygen. So the process will start with this fully developed cell with all of the cell parts. And then over the course of the next 3 to 4 days, it's going to start getting rid of those cell parts as it develops. So think about it as, let's say I have a cup of water, for example. That's probably not the best example, but I'll just say I have a cup of water. And in this cup, I have beads, I have ice, I have I don't know, coffee, I've got a lemon, whatever. So I have all this stuff in my drink, but I just want water. I want my cup to carry water. So over the next 3 or 4 days, I got to get rid of all the other junk that's in my water, my cup, so I can only carry water because that's all I care about. I don't care about coffee. I don't care about lemon. I don't care about beads or ice or any of that stuff. The cells start doing the same thing. So you start developing the blood cell, this prourethroblast is going to start getting rid of the smooth ER and the ribosomes and the nucleus and all this other stuff. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to make room for more, um, basically make room so it could carry more oxygen. Um, and so that process begins inside the bone marrow. So you'll develop from a urethroblast into a we call a normal blast. Um, and then after about 3 to 4 days, that normal blast will get released into the blood vessel. And when it does that, it's called a reticulocyte. So it's mostly a red blood cell. It still has a few cell parts left in it. And then over the next 24 hours, the reticulocyte will get rid of the last little bit um, of of other cell parts it doesn't need. And then 24 hours later, you'll have a mature red blood cell whose only purpose is to carry carry oxygen, CO2, carry oxygen to the cells, and then CO2 and other junk out of the cells. And this red blood cell will live for about 120 days. Now, why does this blood cell live for, basically 4 months? It's because it got rid of all of the other stuff that our cells typically have that allow it to repair itself, to to replicate, um, to function, or to do the daily cell tasks that the cells need to do. The red blood cell got rid of all of that, so it can't repair itself. Um, it will damage, as it goes through the whole body. It's got to squeeze into very tiny capillaries and then go into big open channels like the inferior vena cava, that kind of thing. So just over time, this red blood cell just gets beat up. And because it can't repair itself because it has no other cell parts to do that function, eventually the red blood cell just will not be able to continue to function. And so the body then goes through a whole process of destroying it and then trying to recycle some of the red blood cell parts. And what it can't recycle, it eventually gets rid of in the into the not digestive system, the the urinary system. It just kind of gets rid of it. And then it'll recycle what it needs, and then it'll just keep the process going for other red blood cells. The biggest things to remember, though, for this one are the stages. So I mentioned prourethroblast. You may or may not need that one, but urethroblast, normal blast, reticulocyte, and then mature red blood cell. Those are the 4 steps or phases that a blood cell will go through from bone marrow into being released into the blood vessels of a mature red blood cell. Excuse me, I have this really bad cough right now. So I sound all weird. That's kind of what it is. Okay, last thing I'll cover today is hemostasis. So hemostasis is um, trying to maintain the same level of blood that you have. In this case, is if you bleed out, you start losing blood cells, the body's going to try to come up with a way to quickly stop the leak so that it can maintain as many blood cells as it can. So like I mentioned before in a couple slides, we have three stages or three phases of this. We have the vascular spasm, the platelet plug, and then the coagulation. So the first thing that happens is vascular spasm. So what will happen is that your blood vessels will start to vasoconstrict or constrict. They'll start trying to squeeze to get smaller. So if they can become smaller, less blood cells, yeah, I'll say that, I guess. Not as many blood cells can get out in a short amount of time. So I'm trying to slow the traffic of blood to that area. So instead of losing 100 red blood cells, I lose maybe like 10 or 15. Um, but the whole idea is just to slow down the flow of blood so that you're not losing everything right away. Once that happens, the platelet plug will start forming. So there's a nice little layer of of a of a I'll say hormone or chemical called prostacyclin. And what prostacyclin does, it prevents your platelets from clumping together. So when you're, normal day-to-day life, you don't want blood clots. You don't want that flow of blood to be restricted. And the purpose of platelets is to clot the blood. So as long as this prostacyclin layer is not touched, it keeps the platelets from sticking together. However, when you break a blood vessel, so you get a cut, step on a nail, whatever it might be, that breaks the prostacyclin layer, and now it no longer can prevent the platelets in that area from sticking together. So the three phases for that, for the platelet plug formation, are here on the right. It's platelet adhesion, platelet activation, and platelet aggregation. So the first thing that happens is that the platelets will start sticking to collagen fibers, and collagen fibers are typically here on like the ends of the blood vessels, and you'll start releasing other chemicals to attract other platelets to the area. So this is what we call the positive feedback loop, which we talked about, I think, in the endocrine unit. So if the body realizes that it needs to clot up, it's going to try to clot up really quickly to prevent you from losing blood. Platelet adhesion is just a platelet sticking to parts of the exposed area and then releasing chemicals to get other platelets to come and then start sticking with them. Second phase is platelet activation. So again, I gave you guys two examples about a cut versus like having a puncture with a nail. Those are different sizes of blood vessel damage or broken blood vessels. And so the platelets need to be able to form themselves, change their shape so that they can actually cover up the hole. So in platelet activation, the platelets will actually start altering their shape to be able to connect and actually patch up the hole that you just created in your blood vessel. Um, and then the last portion of it is platelet aggregation. So what happens is the platelets will start bridging together using fibrinogen, and it'll also start, how do I say it? It'll start becoming kind of like this middle picture here. It'll start becoming more of like a clump of platelets and fibrinogen, and also like red blood cells get stuck in it. So it's trying to create this barrier or this bridge made up of platelets and blood cells and fibrinogen and collagen and all this other stuff. So you're starting to form the plug for this one, the platelet plug, but you're not really a clot yet. You just have like the pieces needed to start connecting everything. So in this step two, the platelet plug, it's like a web, think like a web. It's all connected, but there's still pores and stuff can still get out. And then the last portion of it of the process is coagulation or the formation of the blood clot. What will happen here is now that you have all of this clump of platelets and fibrinogen, and red blood cells and white blood cells, whatever was over there, these things called collagen fibers will then start weaving that all this junk together, kind of like tying it all together, like with a string, and it creates the clot that we know of, where it may not be the prettiest looking thing, but it gets the job done. It stops the flow of blood. Think about when you get like a scab and stuff like that. That is the blood clot, if you will. It doesn't look the best, kind of looks a little bit rough around the edges, but it does get the job done in this case. And that's why they tell you don't peel off like the dried clot on your skin, because then you just re-expose all of this and you have to repeat the process to then form a brand new blood clot. That was just like a general review of this one. This adhesion, activation, aggregation, that is straight from Dr. Curley's notes, so definitely pay attention to that. And then Dr. Curley and Jupiter also have different images for hemostasis. So just take a look at all of those, see that make it make sense to you. The whole idea is step one, slow down the flow of blood so that you're not losing anything. Step two, start getting the platelets to start coming together with other things to start creating a web or a bridge to then be able to start to seal off the hole. And then step three, coagulation or clotting, that's where the actual blood clot is formed as like a solid piece that can then stop the flow of blood out of the blood vessel. And then what happens over time is, once you've stopped the flow of blood, other cells will then come in and start trying to repair. They'll repair the blood vessels, they'll repair our skin. And then once that process is done, the clot's no longer needed. So a chemical called fibrinolysis will then be released, and it causes the blood clot to dissolve naturally, and it gets recycled in the body and all that other stuff. And then you're done. And now your blood vessels are repaired, your skin's repaired, and now you can move on and live your day. Obviously, if you've ever had any kind of like a big opening, the cells do the best they can, but you won't get the same skin. You'll have scars. So if you're curious to see what some scars look like, I have plenty of them. I've got one on my face where I got cut with a knife when I was younger. And then I got a few on my elbow from falling and then landing on a very sharp rock that went through my skin and exposed almost exposed like a piece of bone and stuff. So I'll show you guys that in class if you're curious. And that's really all I have for this one. Again, biggest thing for this week is hematology exam can be taken this week. So if you feel confident and ready, just get it over with. Otherwise, if you still want the extra time to practice, you'll still have hematology, and you'll also need to do immunology, which will be due next week. You'll just have to take 2 exams, or she might combine it into like one super exam. I'm not sure how she's going to do that. But other than that, if you have any questions, please reach out. Again, this one shouldn't be too difficult. There's a few challenging concepts, but overall, the stuff that we've already covered, blood typing, which we already did, we did in lab, and was also part of your practical, I believe. Some of the functions, what is made up of blood, the formed elements versus the plasma. And then how our red blood cells develop or are made in the body. And then also hemostasis, which is how our blood clots form to stop us from losing blood. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you very much, and I will see you all next week.